discussing the issues and celebrating the successes of the African American community. This is Another View.
Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. We want to say a special welcome to our new Friday night viewers. As it says in the show's introduction, we discuss the issues and celebrate the successes of the African American community here in Hampton Roads. And we hope that you will make Another View a part of your regular Friday night viewing. Tonight, a conversation with Congressman Bobby Scott. Congressman Scott is no stranger to us. He's represented the 3rd Congressional District of Virginia for 9 terms. He serves on the Committee of the Budget, the Education and Labor Committee, and is chairman of the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security as part of the Committee of the Judiciary. Welcome to the program, Congressman. How are you today?
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. So since you're on the Subcommittee for Terrorism and Crime and Homeland Security, what were your thoughts? Were you really disappointed that Umar Farouk Abdul-Muttalib got through?
Yes, and one of the things that concerned me more than anything else was the initial reaction from the administration. The Secretary of Homeland Security said that everything worked, which was probably more disturbing than the fact that he got through. I think within 24 hours they had revised that and said obviously the system did not work. One of the things that this points out was the problem with establishing the Department of Homeland Security to begin with. You articulated the problem that the FBI, the CIA, and the Department of Defense were not coordinating. We're talking to each other. So we need a Homeland Security Department. And after all the fanfare of establishing the Department of Homeland Security, you look up and the CIA, Department of Defense, and FBI are not in it. And so rather than having 3 groups not talking to each other, now you have 4 people not talking to each other. Thankfully, the President has convened everyone and will be establishing a communications network, so if somebody in the federal government gets information, that it will be shared with others in an effective way so that somebody like this could not get on a plane.
So now, all of the changes that are going on at the international airports, the increased screenings and so forth, do you think that's going to be effective?
If they actually do it, some of the airports have been less responsive than others. But I think we need to do as much as we can in screening to make sure that people who are a danger do not get on planes. But we also have to do diplomacy. So long as there are people who are willing to kill themselves in order to kill others, we're going to be at risk. We have an open society, and so we need to make sure that we reduce the number of people who are out there trying to supporting the terrorists. Now, there's a small group of terrorists for which prisons and bombs are the only thing we can do. I mean, right. they're just. Yeah. But the people around them, when people around them are covering for them and supporting them, then that creates a problem. We have to deal with that.
So, do you think the president is right in moving the focus to Afghanistan as opposed to Iraq, so that in order to combat this terrorism?
There was never much point in going to Iraq to begin with. We said we were responding to 9/11. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. There are no terrorist threat to the United States, according to released documents. They had no weapons of mass destruction. I mean, there's no articulated reason for us even being there. Afghanistan supported Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is the enemy. I mean, they talk about war against terrorism. It's not terrorism. It's Al-Qaeda.
Okay.
Terrorism is a tactic that Al-Qaeda is using. So we need to focus our attention. Now, one of the problems with the war in Afghanistan is we've been messing around there so long that the Al-Qaeda has kind of drifted into Pakistan.
Right.
And so we have a much more of a problem now in Afghanistan. From published reports, there are only about 100 Al-Qaeda left in Afghanistan. So why we need 30,000 more troops is what the president is trying to explain. I'm not sure what the congressional reaction is going to be. He put a lot of thought into his position, and obviously we'll have to put a lot of thought, have a lot of hearings to ascertain what our reaction will be.
Do you think that Americans are going to have to change their attitude also? I mean, you stated a little bit earlier, we have an open society, and we do. But at the same time, there are people who don't like us and who want to do harm to us. So will we have to change our attitudes also in terms of being a little inconvenienced if you will, so that we can travel or do other things?
And we're doing that. I mean, if you think back 15 and 20 years ago, how you got on a plane, obviously it's an entirely different process now. If you look at the U.S. Capitol, where you can't go 20 or 30 yards without passing somebody carrying a military assault weapon, they weren't there 15 or 20 years ago. Passed by the White House. I mean, you used to be able to drive down Pennsylvania Avenue right by the White House. Now you can't. That part of Pennsylvania Avenue is closed. So we have reacted, I think, appropriately, and we may have to do more. But we have an open society, and we're at risk. So we just have to accept some of that risk.
Just before Christmas, the Senate passed the healthcare, their version of healthcare reform. Does not include a public option. How do you feel about that?
Well, I supported the public option. In fact, I made a statement on the floor 16 years ago in support of a public option when we were doing health care way back then. It was never came to anything because the debate fell apart, and we ended up with nothing back then. And the public option is there for a reason. It's competition for insurance companies. We are mandating that people buy insurance. In most states, there is one company with an overwhelming market share, essentially a sole source. We have a public option there so that there will be competition. So if the insurance company wants to charge an extraordinary amount, then we have the option of taking the public option. In fact, the public Medicare and Medicaid run on an administrative expense of about 1%. Most of the major insurance companies now run on administrative profits, dividends, CEO salaries, advertising, commissions, at about 20% overhead. And so if you have a public option, it will create downward pressure on the companies to keep their costs in line, otherwise they'll lose market share. And once you take that away, what you have is a situation where you're mandating that people buy in most states from a sole source with no limit on what they can charge. So
therefore you're forcing people to buy insurance, but yet you're not giving them the break in terms of so that they can afford it.
And most of the people in the exchange will be subsidized over about 10% of their income. And so you have a situation where the insurance companies can charge whatever they want, and the buyer essentially doesn't care because anything over 10% is on the government dime. That is not, without a public option there to keep the costs under control, as you have in the Senate, you have all the pressures are to increase prices. And they have some other things in there where where if you look at it closely, the incentive is in fact to increase costs, to increase prices. That's all the incentives are in that direction. In the House bill, you have the downward pressure of the public option. So the public option is there for a purpose. And without the public option, you do not have the cost controls. There's no mechanism for cost controls. In fact, all the incentives are to increase prices.
So do you think it'll make the compromise?
What happens between the House and the Senate, it's hard to say. You might get to the point where even the Senate bill, as bad as it is, may be better than what we have now, because it deals with pre-existing conditions. It insures a lot more than are insured today. Insurance companies, I guess you can say they can charge what they want now, so the fact that they can charge what they want in the Senate, on the Senate bill with no competition, and a lot worse than what you got now. So we'll have to consider all of the options. The vote in the Senate is problematic. So you have to, you can wish for a better bill, but you have to have something that's going to pass. If we conclude that the Senate bill makes no sense, then we may not have the votes for health care reform. And you can't do it piecemeal. You have to do it all together.
Do the whole thing.
And when we started off, I said, well, let's do it piece by piece. But if we're going to deal with pre-existing conditions, you can only do that in the context of just about everybody covered. Because if you can wait till you get sick before you buy insurance, then everybody will wait until they get sick before they buy insurance. And the people that are insured, on average, will be sicker and cost more, and the costs will spiral out of control. if everybody's buying insurance, then that's shared, and it'll work. But you cannot have a situation where you're not covering everybody, and people can pick and choose whether they're covered or not. To a large extent, we're paying for the uninsured already. About $1,000 a year of a family policy goes to covering people that show up at the emergency room
and don't have
insurance. And so when you go to the emergency room, you got to pay a little extra to cover them. That's about that amounts to about $1,000 a year for insurance. There's another thing that if the insurance companies have to insure whatever walks in the door, they don't need a whole department doing underwriting, figuring out who they're going to insure and who they're not going to insure. And so they'll save some administrative costs. So forcing companies to cover those with pre-existing conditions should not cost much more than they're doing now.
They're currently doing.
Because we're paying for it ineffectively now, and they'll save some administrative costs. And when you add on the extra cost of those with pre-existing conditions, the bottom line is it shouldn't cost that much more than we're doing now.
Why do you think, why was there such a hue and cry and uproar about doing anything?
Well,
with
I think everybody
reform?
has agreed. I think there is a consensus that there's a problem. If you look back, the cost of your policy has doubled in the last 10 years. All of the projections for 10 years from now is that the family policy will cost around $30,000 a year. I mean, you're getting to the point where fewer and fewer companies are providing any health insurance. And it's getting worse. All the trends are showing fewer people covered.
But people showed up at your town hall meetings and all was screaming, "We don't want it. We don't want reform."
Well, yeah, and all of the polls showed that a substantial portion not only wanted insurance but also wanted a public option. So I mean, you can't. The people that show up and yell at you at a town hall meeting may or may not be a representative of the entire community. But I think everybody who's thought about this has concluded that we need to do something. And if you don't have a comprehensive plan, you end up with not being able to solve anything. As a matter of fact, the Republican alternative that did not have a public option in the House did not deal with pre-existing conditions. When you look at the percentage of people 10 years from now that are uninsured, it's the same uninsured today, and there's no effective cost control. The cost will be reduced between 0 and 2 or 3%, according to CBO, which is 0. If they're off a little bit, might go up as a direct result of passing the alternative. So either you have a comprehensive bill where you're covering everybody, or you cannot, as the Republican alternative did, you can't deal with pre-existing conditions, which is one of the major reasons.
Which is a major reason for doing it in the first place.
So
we could spend the whole half hour talking about this, but I want to also talk with you about the bill that you have recently introduced, that you have a lot of your colleagues supporting you with, and that's the Youth Promise Act. And PROMISE stands for Youth Prison Reform Through Opportunity, Mentoring, Intervention, Support, and Education. What is it about?
It's a different approach of dealing with juvenile crime. It takes an evidence-based approach, and because all of the evidence points to a proactive approach rather than waiting for crimes to occur and then dealing with it after the fact, make your investments early. What we have traditionally done is codify slogans and sound bites, pretending to be tough on crime, passing things that sound good, many of which actually have been studied and increase crime. If you increase the number of juveniles tried as adults, every study has shown that will increase the crime rate by sending juveniles to the adult prison system rather than the juvenile system, where they get services, psychological services, even family services, and rehabilitation. And if you increase the number, you're talking about the marginal ones. You're not talking about the serious, heinous crime where they're all being tried as adults now. But if you increase the number, you're talking about people that could have been rehabilitated. They're sent to adult prisons where their friends and mentors for the next 6 months or a couple of years will be adult
people who are even harder criminals
adult
than they
murderers, rapists, and drug dealers. So guess who is more likely to commit a crime when they get out? Those who went to an adult system, more likely to commit a crime, more likely to be committed sooner, more likely to be violent. And yet you have people campaigning on trying more juveniles as adults because it sounds tough on crime. What the Youth Promise Act requires is that it's a grant program, and whatever you do with your money has to be comprehensive and evidence-based. That is,
so in other words, you have to prove that your program
you
works.
have to show the studies, and there are any number of programs and studies that show what works. A comprehensive plan, starting early, giving young people alternatives to gangs. If you wait for young people to join a gang, drop out of school, mess up, get caught, and then start trying to do something about crime, it's too late. You have to do something before they get into gangs, and you have to wonder, why did they join the gang to begin with? I mean, that is a deliberate choice, and you wonder what were the other choices? I mean, if that was the best choice they had, to join a gang, with all that people know that has for your trajectory in life after that, why would somebody join a gang? Because it was the best option the neighborhood provided for them. And so you provide other alternatives, make sure they get a good education and stay in school. Dropping out of school is highly correlated with future crime. Not exactly, but I mean, people who drop out of school are much more likely to end up in the criminal justice system. And get them on the right track, keep them on the right track. When we have done those comprehensive plans, they work. Not only work, but save more money than they cost. Pennsylvania funded about 100 of the programs, spent $60 million. By the couple of years, they looked back, that saved $300 million. Spent 60, saved 300. They did one in Richmond, $3 million program that reduced the number of murders from 19 to 2. Now, if you look at the fewer gunshot wounds showing up at the Medical College of Virginia, they probably saved $3 million in gunshot wounds, uncompensated care for gunshot wounds at the Medical College of Virginia, to say nothing about the amount of money you saved in law enforcement chasing people down in the criminal justice system after they get caught and lock them up. I mean, gunshot wounds are going to be there a long time.
So the whole idea is to work with these kids, at-risk kids, ahead of time.
The idea is to work with them ahead of time so they don't get in trouble to begin with. Now, people say you need a balanced approach. We're already overbalanced. We lock up in the United States more people in the United States than anywhere on earth by far. I mean, it's not even close. About 7 times the international average. Over 700 per 100,000. Pew Research Forum calculated that any incarceration rate over 500 per 100,000 was actually counterproductive. We're locking up in some areas, in some communities, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 per 100,000. 500 is counterproductive. You look at what we're spending in counterproductive incarceration. That's enough to fund all the programs you can think of. And it'd be very difficult, actually, to spend the kind of money that some communities are spending in counterproductive incarceration. The Los Angeles County, we calculate, spends about $5 billion locking people up. And if they spent just a portion of that up front in early childhood education, dropout prevention programs, after-school programs, getting them out of what the Children's Defense Fund calls the cradle-to-prison pipeline, and create a cradle-to-college, a cradle-to-the-workforce pipeline, it's actually cheaper. The Harlem's Children's Zone does essentially that kind of investment, and the crime rate in that area is a mere fraction of what they spend a lot more money producing in Los Angeles with their gang problems. You don't have much of a gang problem in New York because they have made the investments early, they have comprehensive plans, evidence-based, and it works. So the Youth Promise Act encourages community to come together, come up with a plan, and on a priority basis, we will try to fund as many of those plans as you can.
But one of your colleagues, who was initially pro this act, Congressman Forbes, has now changed his mind.
Well, we're still working together, and I think one of the things that we're going to be able to show, we didn't have his amendments in advance. And we'll be able to show that I think studies and evidence will show that his amendments would not have the impact of reducing crime. And we'll have criminologists comment on those amendments. And he was disappointed that his amendment wasn't accepted. He'll have other opportunities to vote. And we have more than half of the House signed up as co-sponsors. So we're very optimistic about the House. Unfortunately, there's a Senate bill that goes in the opposite direction. It has draconian punishments. It targets minorities more than they're targeted already. It has more juvenile life without parole. We're the only country on earth that will lock up juveniles on penalties without parole, crimes committed as juveniles. And I think all of the studies that I've seen of that, including the Department of Justice and other advocacy groups and university professors have shown that that will not work. And so the Youth Promise Act is a program that is evidence-based. You have to show from studies that what you are proposing will actually reduce the crime rate, get young people on a trajectory of going from cradle to college or cradle to workforce. And everybody, I haven't heard anybody suggest that you will not save more money than you spend in the process.
Congressman, there's so much I want to talk to you about, and we're out of time. But you're going to be working on the Youth Promise Act when you go back.
We'll be working on youth
jobs. That's something that the Congress is going to be facing.
We're talking about a moving target on jobs because the states are cutting back. As we spend more money to create jobs, the states are laying people off. So we've got to do a moving target.
Thank you so much for joining us. Will you promise to come back?
I'll come back
And talk to us again? Okay. We so appreciate that. Thank you for being with us. And our thanks to Congressman Bobby Scott for joining us tonight. Up next, a conversation with television personality Al Roker. But first, here's what's happening in Hampton Roads. He is one of the most recognizable faces in America. That's because for more than a decade, every Monday through Friday, Al Roker has been telling us what the weather will be from coast to coast. Our Lisa Godley recently sat down with America's weatherman for an up-close look at the man and what's happening in his neck of the woods.
6 million people wake up with the Today Show crew each and every weekday morning, and Al Roker has been a vital part of this team since 1996. But being in front of the camera wasn't always his dream.
I never wanted to be on TV. I wasn't going to be on television. I went to school. In fact, my department chairman, when I was in college, told me I had the perfect face for radio. But he was the one who put me up for my first job in weather when I was a sophomore.
So what did you want to do?
I wanted to be a producer. I didn't want to be on camera. I wanted to either be a producer or / director.
Roker recently fulfilled that goal when he launched Al Roker Productions in 2006. His company has produced several national commercials, television programs, and was responsible for the critically acclaimed PBS special, Savage Skies. When he's not in front of the camera or producing shows for his own company, Roker is out in the community trying to make a difference. He was recently in Norfolk doing just that when he served as the keynote speaker for the Teens with a Purpose conference at Lake Taylor High School.
The circle continues to grow, but what's great about it is one teen at a time changing the world.
Teens with a Purpose is designed to help teens not only chart their own course, but to address some pretty tough topics like HIV and AIDS, drug use, and gang violence, some things Al Roker feels pretty strongly about. The father of 3 is married to journalist Deborah Roberts. He says in this age of new technology, parents have to educate themselves if they want to protect their children.
My 7-year-old, this was the year he was 6 at the time, was able to change the wallpaper picture on my wife's BlackBerry. I mean, my son has some learning difficulties, but he knew how to do that. So as parents, you have to be at least as savvy as your child, if not more. Because there are a lot of different ways for these people and these predators, whether they be colleagues or peers of your children or adults. You know, there are ways for them to get to them.
While working as the weatherman on the Today Show, Roker, joined by Meredith Vieira, Matt Lauer, and Ann Curry, never misses the opportunity to entertain. But his job has also afforded him the opportunity to interview some pretty famous people. So who was Al Roker most impressed with?
Interviewing Charles Schultz twice, once for the 50th anniversary of Peanuts, and the next time 3 weeks before his death. And this is in no particular order. You know, interviewing Rosa Parks was just a life-altering experience. You know, to be sitting, this close to literally somebody who changed American history, who is the epitome, the embodiment of the phrase, one person can make a difference.
He says he's modeled his career after another popular national weatherman, Willard Scott.
In 1976, I got a job at WTTG in Washington, D.C., and Willard was at WRC. And he basically took me under his wing. He mentored me. And I really consider him my second dad. I mean, he's just a terrific, terrific human being.
And while we wish him many more years on the national scene, Roker says when the time does come to say goodbye, he'd like to be remembered this way.
I would want them to say that after I watched him, I felt better than before I watched him. You know, after I turned the TV off, I felt a little bit better.
That won't be a problem. For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And that's our show for this evening. We invite you to visit our website, www.anotherview.tv. Next week, the 2010 census and why you should be counted. We'll see you next week for Another View.